Tonight, we look back at the decade that was, from the birth of Amazon in South Lake Union
You know, one of the things that's unique about what's happened here in this decade
to the death of one of Seattle's greatest philanthropists.
That I am thrilled and honored to be part of maintaining the proud tradition of professional football in Seattle.
We're covering it all. The biggest stories, the biggest changes.
Welcome to the other side of the rainbow.
As KIRO 7 presents your biggest local news stories of the decade.
Hello, I'm Tracy Leong. As we look ahead to a new year tonight, we look back at the biggest local stories that impacted our region over the past decade. We begin with the arrival and impact Amazon had on Seattle after moving into South Lake Union in 2010. From the housing market to the traffic, Amazon's impact is felt on multiple levels. A rapid transformation that has been met with mixed reactions. For some, it's hard to imagine Seattle before Amazon. KIRO 7's Graham Johnson is a Seattle native. He returned to town in 2005 and vividly remembers the transformation.
We would stop and gas up our vehicles. There were gas stations there. There was a lot of low-level buildings at the time. All of that is pretty much gone, and it's still transforming. And so even for someone like me who's grown up here, I will sometimes turn onto a street and go, where am I? Because things change so quickly. Yeah. And Amazon's a big part of that because they have a lot of the office space. And in fact, they've almost outgrown South Lake Union. And that's why they've really moved into the heart of downtown as well.
In 2010, the tech giant moved into its 11-building campus with roughly 5,000 employees, changing the neighborhood dramatically. University of Washington marketing professor and Seattle Growth podcast host Jeff Schulman says it became unrecognizable within a few years.
you see an economic transformation, you see a cultural transformation, and you see a physical transformation. Everybody knows, as anybody could see, there's cranes everywhere. Seattle's led the nation in cranes several years in a row, and it is just a dramatic change with Amazon's growth down in South Lake Union.
Why has Amazon been able to spur this massive amount of growth in the city?
And so Amazon's not just leading the charge, they're kind of following a larger pattern at play, which is people want to be in dense, urban, walkable environments. And so Amazon went where people already wanted to be, and now they made it so people want to be there even more because now there's a job there, a high-paying job there, and there's a wealth of activity around it.
Amazon's success has also drawn in other tech giants and startups to compete for Seattle's diverse and bright tech talent.
You know, one of the things that's unique about what's happened here in this decade is a large-scale employer putting tens of thousands of high-paying jobs in the center of a city. So, you know, go back 20, 30 years ago, big companies and corporations were in suburbs. And so here we're putting a huge concentration in a place where people live, work, and play. And so a lot of people want that. They want to be able to live, work, and play all within a walk. But with that is coming a host of excitement and a host of challenges.
Challenges that include a massive growth in employees, attracting tens of thousands of people to Seattle, driving up the cost of living and putting pressure on Seattle's resources.
This has been hard for people to watch in some ways who aren't connected to Amazon, especially those who are longtime Seattleites, because they have seen the city transform from a car-centric, sort of more mellow place to a bigger city. We are now moving into that big time in Seattle, that world-class status. And while that excites a lot of people, it also concerns a lot of people. And Amazon is right at the heart of that. And so we have definitely seen some of those tensions as people have looked and they've thought, well, isn't the traffic getting worse because of Amazon? Can I no longer afford to live here because of Amazon? Because we have a lot of people now working for Amazon who make a lot of good money and they can afford to pay more for homes. And that's one of the reasons that the real estate market has just exploded here.
Our emergency services have been at capacity, our schools have been at capacity, our hospitals have been at capacity, and our roads have been at capacity. So we're just seeing some growing pains as a wealth of people and money have moved into the city.
The boom has also highlighted Seattle's wealth gap, which seems to be expanding at a record pace.
we've seen a growing divide here between the haves and the have-nots. This is a story all over the country, but we are definitely seeing it here. And this is a real concern for people in Seattle, because we have well-paid tech people and we have people who are struggling to get by, and the divide is growing. And that is leading to a lot of new political tension.
Now it appears Amazon's focus has turned to fixing the issues it may be contributing to.
You can expect a renewed debate at City Hall about Amazon's role in Seattle, and also whether they should be paying more for some of the services here. They had been criticized for many years for not being as civically engaged. That has changed more recently. They made big donations to Mary's Place, which is a much beloved organization that helps homeless families. They're going to actually put a homeless shelter inside an office tower in Seattle, which is extraordinary. So we will see, I think that is all part of that relationship between Amazon and the city that we'll see evolve more over the next decade.
As Seattle continues to fill up with tech transplants, the city's housing market has seen quite the boom over the past decade. No secret about that, but still these numbers from Zillow are eye-opening. The average home value in Seattle at the beginning of the decade, $382,000. Today, that number has risen over 88%. Homes for sale are also spending about half the time on the open market compared to 2010. And Seattle rentals have seen nearly an $800 per month increase between the start and end of the decade. Amanda Knox is a name that dominated national headlines through the decade. Knox was studying abroad in Italy when she was convicted, imprisoned, and ultimately exonerated for the murder of her roommate, Meredith Kircher, in 2007. Knox spent 4 years in prison before her conviction was overturned in 2011. In the summer of 19, Knox returned to Italy for the first time since being acquitted in 2015 and spoke in Italian at an Innocence Project event. During her speech, Knox recalled an Italian prosecutor who insisted Knox killed her roommate.
One day I would like to meet the real Dr. Minniti, and I hope that when that day comes, he will also be able to come and see that I am not a monster. I am simply Amanda.
Knox said Italian prosecutors made up stories about her sex life and details about the murder. The West Seattle native is now working on an advice column titled Ask Amanda Knox. In February of 2012, a cold case search for missing mother Susan Cox Powell took an unexpected turn. With a social worker locked outside, Josh Powell killed his and Susan's 2 boys in a house explosion in Graham. After Susan disappeared in 2009, all fingers pointed at Josh Powell, who ended up moving with his 2 kids to his father's home, Stephen Powell. In 2011, Josh lost custody of the boys after Stephen was sent to prison on child pornography charges. After the fiery explosion, investigators turned to Stephen Powell as they continued to look into the disappearance of Susan. Then in 2018, Stephen died at a Tacoma hospital. When a sheriff's spokesperson told us Stephen Powell died of heart issues, police and reporters wondered aloud if he even had a heart. KIRO 7's Graham Johnson covered the case for years and has an in-depth look at the secrets Stephen Powell might have taken to his grave.
For the better part of a decade, Stephen Powell was a thorn in the side of Pierce County investigators.
He's always taunted the police. He's always been arrogant and obnoxious and uncooperative, on top of doing the things he did wrong that put him in prison.
Investigators believe Stephen Powell might have known where to find the body of his daughter-in-law, Susan Cox Powell, who disappeared in Utah in December 2009.
Maybe on his deathbed, a dying declaration or something would have been nice. We just didn't get there.
Suspicion quickly fell on Josh Powell, Stephen's son and Susan's husband.
Josh Powell tells police he took his little boys on a last-second camping trip at midnight in the mountains in sub-zero temperatures. He says when he returned home the next day, his wife, 28-year-old Susan, was gone without a trace.
Sometimes we go out looking for rocks.
Were you looking for rocks that night? Was that a rock hunting trip?
We just were playing.
One report said it was a blizzard.
Maybe
nobody goes camping on a blizzard.
Yeah.
Josh Powell moved to his father's home in South Hill. In 2011, police raided the house and found photos Stephen Powell had taken of neighbor girls as they undressed.
State of Washington versus Stephen Craig Powell.
He was convicted of voyeurism and later of possessing child pornography. Investigators also found illicit images of Susan Cox Powell in Stephen's possession.
The images of Susan Powell are more what I would call creepy than criminal. There was nothing there we could charge.
That was Pierce County prosecutor Mark Lindquist in 2011. Today, Lindquist reacted this way to Stephen Powell's death.
I will always believe that he had information on the murder of Susan Powell, but he decided to take that to the grave. I don't believe he will fare well in the afterlife.
The case that always frustrated investigators took a heartbreaking turn in February 2012. Josh Powell set on fire the house he was living in with his sons, 7-year-old Charlie and 5-year-old Braden. Powell and both of his sons died.
And unfortunately for those two boys and the mom, Susan, they ended up being the victims of both Josh and Steve.
As 2012 came to an end, hundreds of same-sex couples across Washington state started picking up marriage licenses. Earlier that year, Washington, Maine, and Maryland became the first states to pass same-sex marriage by popular vote. Washington joined 6 other states, New York, Connecticut, Iowa, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, and the District of Columbia, that had already enacted laws or issued court rulings permitting same-sex marriage. Then in 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the Constitution allows for same-sex marriages, which effectively overturned the remaining restrictions in states.
Today I'm able to say to Americans what I said to Washingtonians the day we signed our marriage equality bill. Welcome to the other side of the rainbow.
That was former Seattle Mayor Ed Murray, one of the nation's first openly gay married mayors in the country. Murray's term as mayor came to a controversial ending in 2017. He resigned after a 5th man publicly accused the mayor of sexual assault. Murray has continued to deny those accusations.
I know who I am, and I feel really good about the hands that the city is in right now.
Anything you're looking forward to?
I'm going to live my life. This is where my husband is. This is where his 93-year-old father is. This is where my friends are. I made my statements. I'm not going to continue to repeat it. So thank you all very much. I am a private citizen.
Washington state was also at the forefront of the country's marijuana boom in 2012. Voters in Washington and Colorado passed measures to legalize and tax recreational marijuana. Today, 11 total states have fully legalized the use of pot, with a number of others either decriminalizing it or allowing the medical use of marijuana. As we continue to follow some of the biggest stories of the decade, we want to bring in our KIRO 7 traffic expert, Tracy Taylor, to talk about one of the biggest traffic stories of the decade, SR 99 tunnel.
And the Highway 99 tunnel. And it all starts way back in 2001.
I know. We want to go in depth. So just first of all, tell us, why did Seattle want this tunnel?
Well, Tracy, you weren't here for this. I have been here since the 2001 February 28th Nisqually earthquake. We had a 6.8 magnitude earthquake, which essentially shook the city and shook the Alaskan Way Viaduct. And what had happened with that is it shook it so much so that it caused the viaduct to sink a little bit. And after inspection and after investigation of the roadway, they found out if that earthquake was any bigger, it would have essentially just completely collapsed. So that's the reason why legislature and state representatives started looking for alternate ways to replace the Alaskan Way Viaduct.
Okay, and then that brings in the next question. Why did they bring in Bertha?
So Bertha was kind of one of those things where not only state legislature, but pretty much everybody, WashDOT was looking for a good, viable way to bring something in that will essentially keep traffic moving. And so when they decided that an elevated portion of the roadway wouldn't work out, they went to a boring tunnel, which leads us to Bertha. And Bertha was kind of one of those things where they investigated, they did a lot of research, and finally she arrived here in the city in April of 2013.
And this brings us to our next question. What caused Bertha to break down, and how did this delay the project?
So when Bertha started tunneling back in 2013, she really kind of started to kind of move and shake things, so to speak, here in the city. Bertha started her journey beneath downtown Seattle in July of 2013. So the initial plans for the drilling were to take 14 months. Pretty much a short time. I mean, they were going to travel about 9.5 feet and plan to dig a little bit more than 9,000 feet underneath the city. And so by 2013 in December, she was about 4 months into her journey.
Okay.
Underneath the city from Soto to South Lake Union. Well, the cutter head of Bertha hit a steel pipe near South Main Street, pretty much Pioneer Square.
Okay.
And so it began to overheat. Then it became some problems. Pretty much after some of the repairs, the tunnel began digging 2 years later.
Wow. Big delay.
Yeah, huge delay. And then essentially it cost the city and the state a lot of money, not only to get this repaired, but it put the project, which was scheduled to open in 2017, 2 years behind.
Wow, wow. So everyone impacted by that breakdown and that huge delay, you know, moving forward, you know, when it finally got back on track, we had to take down the Alaskan Way Viaduct. That was a part of this process. I know for you, you saw it, you were there, we had crews out there. You know, professionally and personally, I guess there's kind of some blurred lines with how you felt about that.
You know, the one thing that brought me here to this city, and I remember specifically when I had interviewed here in early 2000, was the Alaska Way Viaduct. The beautiful overhead, you drive into the city, just a beautiful view of Elliott Bay. It was magnificent. However, after the Nisqually earthquake, I was here when that had happened. I reported traffic when that had happened. I knew myself that something was going to have to change. So when everything is said and done, and I've watched this from start to finish, you know, I'm actually, it's bittersweet to see the Alaska Way Viaduct come down. I think for one, it's just such a historical part of the city. But on top of that, it was just one of those things where, you know, if you go back and look at some of our footage, and when they closed it down, we had lines of cars through Belltown and South Lake Union just to drive the viaduct one last time before it all shut down and the demolition had happened.
Now, just taking me back to that moment, when you knew that you were driving over it and this was going to be the last time.
Yeah.
What was going through your mind?
A little emotional.
Right,
I'm going to be honest with you. I was a little emotional about it just because it was such a beautiful part of my life here in the city. Something that has got significant place in my heart. So, but to think of it when it comes to mobility and taking the personal part out of it, and the mobility in the city, I was thinking to myself, man, this is not going to be good, especially for riders, drivers, residents, even tourism down along the waterfront. However, we've seen that change now that the viaduct's done, the tunnel is in place. We've seen a lot change within the last, I would say, several months since tolling has gone into place now along the waterfront.
Okay, and that brings us, you know, fast forward, they opened the tunnel, they opened it just this year, earlier, sort of around the time I arrived.
Yeah.
How has this impacted traffic?
So when the tunnel opened in February, there was a lot of pushback. A lot of people were like, yeah, you know, I don't know how I feel about that. And that's why DOT gave everybody an opportunity to really kind of experiment with it and to see how and if this would really change your commute, you know, leaving it free and whatnot. Now that tolling has gone into play, beginning of November, we're starting to see a huge difference when it comes to mobility in our city. Now, drivers are still using Highway 99 coming in from the south and coming in from the north. However, we're seeing them filter off onto some of the surface streets. A lot of added pressure through the Belltown corridor. We're seeing a lot of pressure on the waterfront as well. And now we're starting to see more pressure move over to the I-5 interchange. We're seeing the drive on northbound I-5 out of the south end ramp up as early as 4:45 in the morning.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it only leaves me to believe that there's going to be more projects in the future to alleviate some of the congestion we're seeing.
And I think DOT, along state and city, DOT are doing their best to remedy the situation, educating drivers. That's a part of my job as well, is to make sure that you know what you have before you every morning when you get up. So what it comes down to is I think we're I don't think we're in a steady pattern for right now. I think we're in an experimental phase to see what's what's going to work best for you when it comes down to your commute. Brass tacks, so to speak. What's your time worth? Are you willing to pay the $1.25 or $3.25 to get where you need to be if it leads you into downtown Seattle? It's just one of those things I think that it's going to be ever evolving as we continue.
Okay, and Tracy, we want to thank you so much, especially just your point of view, your perspective on this. You know, our expert, our in-house expert, and of course you can catch us anytime, Monday through Friday from 4:30 to 7. Plenty more to come as we look back at the most significant stories of the decade in Seattle. We'll dive deep into the grunge music scene and a joyride in the sky that nobody can forget.
Every day at 5, KIRO 7 is live, local, and in-depth.
So you are covered on the big stories of the day. Market Street completely shut down.
Live, so you experience what's happening now.
They wanted to get you a hot call, the guy trying to jack a car.
Local, because what happens here matters.
Investigators are warning anybody using this trail.
In-depth to give you a new level of understanding.
Are you confident in 5 years I won't be here again asking you the same questions?
Here's the bottom line. Know what's happening now.
KIRO 7 News, 5 to 6:30, live, local, in-depth.
Welcome back to this KIRO 7 News special, a look back at the biggest news stories of the decade. As we continue through the decade, no story in 2014 had a bigger impact in our region than the Oso landslide. The single deadliest landslide in U.S. history killed 43 people and leveled dozens of homes when it roared down a hillside near the Stillaguamish River. A memorial is in the works and will commemorate the lives lost, a community destroyed, the first responders' heroic efforts, and the grief and resilience of the survivors. Here's a snippet from our 60th anniversary special as we look back at that fateful day.
March 22nd, 2014, fairly early morning, I got a call that there was some sort of landslide in Oso. Quite frankly, I didn't know where Oso was at that point.
The Oso landslide, boy, almost 3 years. Almost 4 years.
Then we heard that people might be trapped.
There's like a landslide and everything's gone. The houses are gone.
And that's when your mind starts racing and you start thinking, oh, what are those people going through? What are they going through?
And that is when I realized this is going to be a big deal.
Officials here are still calling this a rescue effort, but admit it will most likely be a recovery mission.
And they could hear their neighbors dying around them.
Yeah, the boy tells me from where he was, he could see people trapped in the mud who were bleeding and could hear other people who were screaming for help.
We drove in every day, covered the stories, interviewed the first responders and the people who were impacted. And every night after we were done, we drove back to Seattle. And I always felt guilty that I could just pack up and drive away. Because they couldn't.
Nearly 50 people dead at once? I mean, the funeral homes were overwhelmed. We talked to funeral people. We did this story for a really long time.
President Obama came
met with the people at OSO.
And that's why I wanted to come here, just to let you know that the country is thinking about all of you.
And people constantly told us that they just appreciated the symbolism of that visit, even though he did mispronounce the name of the town.
Very few Americans have ever heard of OSO before the disaster struck.
When that hillside came down, it covered 1 square mile around the Stillaguamish River. People had known who lived there about the slide-prone area, but I don't know if anyone ever imagined something of this magnitude would happen there.
You know, there are many people with much more expertise than I who are still debating this, but it's a conversation that needs to continue, especially given how much development is going on over our entire area.
Whatever way you slice it, it is just so heartbreaking. So many people died there, and that area was just devastated.
Could this accident have been prevented? The answer is a resounding yes.
December 18th, 2017, the KIRO 7 morning newscast was just wrapping up when a passenger train derailed into I-5 near DuPont. We later learned that 3 people died, dozens of others were injured in the crash. The victims' families were eventually awarded $17 million. An investigation revealed that the train's engineer had little experience on the route and missed speed limit warning signs telling him to slow down.
I'm just amazed at the amount of failure that goes along here.
In June of 2019, the National Transportation Safety Board published its final report on the crash, with the agency's vice chairman blasting what he described as a Titanic-like complacency among those charged with ensuring safe train operations. As we continue to cover the biggest stories of the decade, we remember a somber moment, the tragic and sudden passing of rock icon Chris Cornell. The Soundgarden singer took his own life in May 2017 after his last concert in Detroit. Cornell is an artist that is remembered for his immense talent and crucial role in shaping the grunge movement here in Seattle. Cornell, the voice of grunge, transformed the Seattle music scene in the early 90s as Soundgarden's frontman.
I think that it really turned Seattle from this kind of sleepy backwater that nobody thought anything would happen music related into the, the center of, the popular music universe.
Museum of Popular Culture's Jacob McMurray says Cornell's decision to stay in Seattle at the start of his career created the vibrant music scene we see today in Seattle.
With that explosion of grunge in Seattle in the early 90s, it really sort of shifted the way that Seattle looks at its own indigenous music scene, where it's like now we have, city programs that are dedicated to music. We have a museum that's, dedicated to music. We have all ages venues where underage kids can go see music. So Seattle is really, music is really woven into the fabric of Seattle at this point, and that definitely wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for grunge in the early 90s.
The Soundgarden singer's final performance was in 2017. Cornell took his own life after the group's concert in Detroit on May 18th. He was 52.
Chris Cornell was in his early 50s, and he had had storied multiple careers in in different bands, and I don't think people were aware of the sort of issues that he was going through, and I think it was a huge, huge blow to the local community.
KIRO 7's Matt Smith was working in Detroit when Cornell died. He recalls the difficult day in detail.
Not only just covering the story, but I remember actually having to call my brother to tell him that Cornell died, because I knew how much it meant to him. But yeah, you always knew in the back of your head how important that moment was. He's an idol, not only here in Seattle, but anywhere. So working in Detroit, you were kind of going through a lot of things, realizing the magnitude and how many people were going to be affected by it.
Tributes to the late singer played out across the country, in his hometown of Seattle and outside the Fox Theater in Detroit, where just hours before he had performed on stage.
As the news broke, you could see the reaction from people, because folks were showing up just to be there. There was this signage out front that still had the poster, more or less, of the show that was playing that night. So people really just kind of want to be there, I guess, to reflect and have a moment with Cornell.
Nearly 1 year after his death, Chris Cornell's widow, Vicki Cornell, commissioned a bronze statue of her late husband and donated it to Mopop.
This statue is a commemoration, a focal point to keep Chris's memory alive in us
in Seattle and in the world.
It was unveiled outside the museum, drawing in a huge crowd to celebrate a Seattle icon. Today, it continues to bring fans together.
For Mopop, it's a great way to sort of visually symbolize, Chris's impact upon our community and upon our culture. I mean, it's something that people see every day as they walk to work, and we're often seeing people leave flowers or putting things around Chris's neck or candles. So I mean, you definitely get this sense of the public being able to interact and being able to process their own sort of grief and their own sort of personal narrative as it concerns Soundgarden and Chris Cornell. So I don't know, to me it's been really gratifying to see how the public react to this sculpture.
The late singer's death also started a dialogue.
It brought up a lot for us in the museum of like, how do we deal with suicide and mental illness, within popular culture figures that we deal with. It's a growing topic of conversation in museums of like how we can not only reflect history and reflect the stories that we cover, but also be advocates for and resources for people that are struggling.
Remembered as the pioneer of the grunge movement, his music is forever woven into Seattle and the fans he touched around the world.
Being something that's new to Seattle, I feel like Cornell was still a big part of people's lives outside of here, and growing up in a family with an older brother that idolized him, that went and did music for over a decade himself and really got involved in that. It was a hard day for people, regardless of where Cornell came from, because again, he, as an artist, he touched a lot of people. That was the music people grew up on, and we all lost something that day. Chris Cornell was, he was one of our brightest voices. I mean, he was probably one of the best vocalists in rock and roll history, and we lost a big one.
Where were you when an empty passenger plane was stolen from SeaTac Airport, went on an hours-long joyride and crashed on a small island in Pierce County?
I'm Bieber Russell, and I'm a ground service agent.
It was August 10, 2018, when Horizon ground crew employee Richard Russell stole a plane and took off on a wild chase with fighter jets on his tail. During the flight, Russell told the air traffic controller he wasn't really planning on landing the aircraft, and he described himself as just a broken guy.
Just a broken guy. Got a few screws loose, I guess. Never really knew it until now. I think I'm going to try to do a barrel roll. And if that goes good, I'll just go nose down and call it a night.
The FBI found Russell was familiar with the checklist for starting a passenger plane and taught himself how to fly by watching online flight instruction videos. We continue to look back at the best this decade has to offer. Coming up, we honor one of Seattle's greatest philanthropists while looking at Paul Allen's far-reaching impact long after his death.
If you live in Western Washington, you know that the weather here is predictably unpredictable.
On any given day, you can have this,
and this, all within 10 miles.
KIRO 7 knows you work in it, play in it, and eventually get out in it.
That's why our experience forecasting for the unpredictable always keeps you prepared.
We use tools built for our big weather issues.
Like the KIRO 7 Pinpoint Wind Tracker and the Pinpoint Storm Tracker.
So you can plan and prepare wherever you live in the Sound.
The Seahawks' 2013-14 season was destined for greatness from the very beginning. The loud and boisterous Legion of Boom was at its peak, while a young Russell Wilson was just starting to round into shape behind a monster run game. And as we look back at that magical season that was, it's only fitting the voice of the Seahawks, Steve Rabel, takes it from here.
I remember how loud it was at MetLife Stadium and how many of those fans were 12s. You could hear the 12s cheering every time something happened. It was like a home game. And I said it in the broadcast. You'd think we were back at home.
It felt different than that first Super Bowl run where we went to Detroit.
It was a bizarre game. It was far more lopsided than I think people expected.
The game was long since decided, so it wasn't like it was going to be a last-second field goal that was going to determine it. We knew probably from the beginning of the second half on that there was nothing the Broncos could do to get back into this football game. And within moments, Paul Allen would hold that Vince Lombardi trophy over his head, and Russell Wilson would do the same thing, and John Schneider and Peter McLaughlin and all those who helped put that team together.
That's what makes the players, gives them that compulsion to play at their top of their game, and that's why Pete Carroll said from the very outset, this is for the 12s.
Now they can call themselves world champs, and they're going to get rings about as big as a pork roast to sit on their fingers. It's going to be great. The party was great after that. I remember doing a live shot with Monique after the game. It's starting to snow, and I'm just outside the team hotel after we got back from the stadium. And she said they were going crazy in the U District, and there were people in the streets celebrating, and I just remember that all of us were beat.
All the dentists at home are cringing, but the Skittles are rampant today.
And people were just so joyous. I mean, people were hugging each other and putting their arms around each other, people who otherwise might not even say hi to one another on the street. And everybody was just so stoked.
20, 30, 40, maybe 100 deep. It goes back a couple blocks.
If this team wins another 5 Super Bowls and we have 5 more parades, there will never be anything like the first parade.
Hey, so tell me, Steve, what is this all like? What does it feel like?
When your city unites around you so much that they'll cancel school so you can attend a parade, it shows you how important it is.
And they just wanted to yell and celebrate. That's all they wanted to do. This was their team. It was in their city. They were the Super Bowl champs.
You know, Seahawks fans, bring home the Lombardi. Bring home the Lombardi. This city's never seen it before. You're seeing it right now.
And to have something like, what was it, 700,000 people lining the streets of Seattle on just a crystal clear day in February was absolutely amazing. So much fun.
Down every sidewalk, on every overhanging tree branch, standing on every mailbox and car top, and down every side street. It was just packed.
Pete Carroll, there he is. He's going to get some cheers, boy. Mr. Sherman. And there's Mr. Sherman.
And Steve even looked like a little kid. He was so excited, and I know that had to be one of the best days of his life as well.
It was absolutely one of the great memories I'll ever have about this team and this organization and this city.
Saying goodbye to a giant of industry, innovation, and philanthropy. Paul Allen lost his battle with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma the day after the Seahawks returned from their 2018 London trip. KIRO 7's Monique Minlavin honors the legend and looks back at the lasting legacy Paul Allen had right here in the Pacific Northwest.
Paul Allen might not be as renowned as his Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates, but his impact on Western Washington is just as profound.
That I am thrilled and honored to be part of maintaining the proud tradition of professional football in Seattle.
When Ken Behring nearly moved the Seahawks to Los Angeles in the mid-90s, Allen invested $200 million of his own money to buy the team and keep it in Seattle. He also paid for a special election so King County voters could approve a new stadium to replace the aging Kingdome. The initiative passed by a razor-thin margin.
I don't know if Marshawn will see it, but there's a sign that says
An appropriate 12 years after cutting the ribbon on the new facility, Paul Allen and the Seahawks reached the pinnacle of American sports when they brought home Seattle's first ever Super Bowl title. In addition to owning the Seahawks and the Portland Trail Blazers, Paul Allen's portfolio is a diverse collection of science, aviation, and entertainment. His vast real estate footprint in South Lake Union includes the Allen Institute that researches the biggest questions in human biology. His Flying Heritage Museum at Payne Field is home to priceless warplanes, many of which are the last of their kind. He also put his stamp on local entertainment with popular venues like the Museum of Pop Culture and the Seattle Cinerama. One of the world's most famous partnerships was often fractured. Allen described Gates as a ruthless taskmaster who would spend hours yelling and screaming at employees. He told 60 Minutes about a conversation he overheard in the early 80s between Gates and Steve Ballmer whispering about forcing him out of the company.
They were basically talking about how they were planning to dilute my share down to almost nothing. And it was really a shocking and disheartening moment for me.
And you were sick?
Well, I think I was still probably in the middle of radiation therapy.
A man who beat cancer twice, Allen left Microsoft shortly after that encounter with all his stock in hand. He went on to build his own empire that includes Vulcan, the Seattle company that manages his business and charity endeavors. His memoir, Idea Man, was published in 2011, shortly after his second cancer battle.
But the timing was because I wanted to see if I could do it and hopefully be alive to see it published.
One estimate puts Paul Allen's charitable giving at more than $2 billion, and he pledged to give away even more of his fortune after his death. A Puget Sound pioneer in sports and science, technology and philanthropy.
McCautry takes a dribble with 4 seconds left, fires up a three, no good. Rebound Miller with 1 second left, kicks it back out to Coco, three at the buzzer, no good! Seattle, you have a champion once again!
The Seattle Storm have enjoyed a lot of the last 10 years at the top of their sport. They began the decade by beating the Atlanta Dream in 2010 to capture their second WNBA title. Sue Bird, Breanna Stewart and company followed that up in 2018 with a win over the Washington Mystics, their third championship in team history. Of the teams that have been able to go to the finals, the Storm are one of two who have never lost in the championship series. The three-time champs also won a title back in 2004 when they beat the Connecticut Sun. The Sounders FC have also lifted this. It didn't feature the Rave Green. We end tonight with a story we will surely be talking about over the next 10 years, and that's the return of professional hockey in Seattle. The Sockeyes, the Totems, or the Kraken, the team name is still up for grabs, but as Seattle patiently waits to learn more about its newest franchise, the 57-year-old Key Arena is getting a facelift into the 21st century. NHL Seattle President and CEO Todd Leiweke is leading the charge behind a $900 million renovation to the Key, with the NHL hoping to drop the puck in 2021. Well, what a decade it has been, and thank you for letting us into your home throughout the years. We hope KIRO 7 can be your trusted source for news for decades to come. This has been a KIRO 24/7 special, A Decade in Review. I'm Tracy Leong. Have a great day.
KIRO 7 News is live, local, in-depth, 24/7. Log on to KIRO7.com and download the KIRO 7 News and Weather apps. KIRO 7 is a Cox Media Group station.